There's a minute. You said her name is Matsidi.
It's 1 minute.
You said her name is Matsidi. Hello?
Should I take this one? Sorry, is this one on? Yes. It is on. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming back from lunch. My name is Nomatlubi Kinana, a commissioner in the Human Rights Commission, who's got a number of focal areas that include civil and political rights, persons with disabilities, older persons, justice, social security, as well as children. We even have a conference over the weekend where the children are going to lead that conference. And it is on cyber bullying. Yeah, that was just on a lighter note. So thank you so much really for joining us. We've got our panelists. This morning we have all learned a lot. And Nicholas, you are even in some of the panels, and you've already shared a number of insights on this. So really it is a privilege to open once more this conversation on equitable share, pro-poor budgeting, and human rights. We meet at a time when these issues are no longer abstract. For millions of people, the budget is not a spreadsheet. It is the difference between water and no water, between a clinic that works and one that fails, between safe transport and dangerous roads, between dignity and exclusion. That is why this discussion matters. When we speak about equitable share, we are speaking about justice in public finance. Equitable share is not simply a transfer mechanism. It is one of the clearest ways in which the state gives practical meaning to its constitutional obligations. It is meant to ensure that poorer provinces and municipalities are not left behind, and that basic services can still reach communities even when poverty is deep and the local revenue base is weak. But we must be honest, an allocation on paper does not automatically become justice in practice. Money can be transferred, and yet services can still fail. Budgets can increase in nominal terms while declining in real value because of inflation, population growth, and rising demand. A municipality can receive equitable share, yet poor households may still experience water shortages, electricity insecurity, food insecurity, sanitation breakdowns, and collapsing infrastructure. So the real question is not only whether funds are allocated, the real question is whether people experience those funds as access, quality, safety, and dignity. This is where pro-poor budgeting becomes essential. A pro-poor budget is not just a budget that mentions the poor. It is a budget that starts with the realities of the poor. It asks who is excluded. Where are they excluded? Why are they excluded? And what barriers prevent them from enjoying the rights they already hold in law? It recognizes that poverty is not only about income, it is about distance from services, high transport costs, unaffordable electricity, food insecurity, weak schools, unsafe settlements, and the daily burden carried especially by women, children, the older persons, persons with disabilities, and those in informal work. Now, the question that I asked my panelists this afternoon is, do we have equitable share? And can you really say for sure that no one is left behind? You know, just listening to the conversation just before lunch, when it was asked of one of the panelists, I think it was Nonhlanhla, that where do you locate the older persons, persons with disabilities? Because you're talking about women, are they located in there? And I said to her when I spoke to her during lunch was that I did not hear you answer that question. Because older persons are individuals in their own right. Persons with disabilities are individuals in their own right. And their issues have to be addressed as such. And the Khoi and the San, Che, as I start with you, the Khoi and the San communities, they are yet to realize, you know, the rights enshrined in the Constitution. To date, they're still fighting for that recognition. Whilst they say they are amongst the first people in South Africa, is that even a reality for them? Are they located in these very budgets that we have been talking about since yesterday and today? Do we see the fiscals of our country speaking to their issues? Because even at the food inquiry just last week, they were saying we are nowhere to be found. We do not, it seems we have been forgotten. We are that forgotten tribe. Thank you, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson of the session. You know, in the preamble of the Constitution, right at the end, it says that, you know, that the language of the Khoi and San and Nama must be not developed, but must be promoted and to act upon. And 30 years of the Constitution, very little has happened. In the Northern Cape, they tried with the language at Rimfasmark, tried to have it in the schools, but Pansalp has really neglected the Khoi and San, but not only the Khoi and San. I'm talking in terms of what the Constitution is saying, the preamble. So nothing has happened for the last 30 years. But there are also other indigenous groupings in the country. It's not only the Khoi and the San, and you can find them and elsewhere in the country, where the language is not recognized even. And so we can start with that. The second thing is the Khoi and San has been, we as the Commission did an inquiry in 2016 and 2017 that we went around the country, it's a national hearing, on the Khoi and San. We've made a number of recommendations to government, different government departments. COCTA took that responsibility over of coordinating that the recommendations of the Human Rights Commission after consulting with hundreds of people on it. So yes, we sit with a problem on that we see that the Khoi and San in particular, but in general, there are other marginalized communities. I visited Platfontein last week in Kimberley. Now that is a group of people that came from, they're from southern Angola, northern Namibia, but they are also were part of what was then called Kufut, the army, SADF. And they were used as trackers during the war that we've had, But then they were then brought to South Africa. They were made citizens of South Africa. They were first at Smithsdrift and then to Platfontein. And they are going through a terrible time as we speak now. Terrible, terrible time from sanitation, water, electricity, etc. And also job, food security. So yes, there is that the government has done some things because we have a Korean Traditional Council, Korean San Traditional Council. There's also the National Council of Korean San. We've done a lot, but much we need to do more because we say leave nobody behind. They have been left behind. They've left behind in the issue of land, in the issue of language, in the issue of opportunities, in the issue of even recognition, which is very, very important. In some places, Koi and Sun paintings are being removed because people don't want it on their farms because that gives a recognition that there were people here before. I'm reminded of a story that I've dealt with many, many years ago on the West Coast. It was a place called Elandskral, where people were removed. They were church people that lived on the property that was registered in the White Dutch Reformed Church. And they were removed through Group Areas Act. And there was one person, Mr. John January, that went all over to seek help for them to get back onto the land. And he relayed the story to me that, and he talks about the 70s and the 80s. I met him in the 80s. And he said, whichever door he knocked on, they asked him, where is your cart and transport of the property that you want to go back on? And he said, if you go down this kloof, you see the rock paintings of my ancestors. That is my cart and transport.
Thank you so much, Chair, for starting us off in that way. In fact, I'm reminded that when I visited Eastern Cape and I visited the Korean San communities, and they were saying, where do you find a police officer who's a Korean San? And again, the language itself, it's not located anywhere, still not recognized. Once we have 12 official languages, that language is not one of the languages. All right, thank you so much, Chair. And then let me come to you, Julian. Julie, yes, Julie.
Hello?
Julie,
Oh, there we go. Okay.
equitable share. And who is being left behind?
Sure. So I want to speak specifically today to older persons. So as noted earlier by the chair, thank you so much for noting that older persons are persons in their own right, and they are often left behind. However, South Africa does have policy on older persons. It's known as the Older Persons Act of 2006 that affirms the rights, dignity, and well-being of older persons and emphasizes the concept of aging in place. This is the idea that older persons should be able to remain in their homes as well as their communities, supported by family and community-based care rather than institutionalization. So this reflects a broader ethic that aligns with the South African ethic. But while the policy vision is broad, the lived reality is far narrower. In practice, public support for older persons is extremely limited. Service centers, largely run by underfunded non-profit organizations, reach only about 80,000 older persons. So for context, there are 6.6 million older persons in South Africa. That is 10.5% of the population. Home-based care reaches only about 100,000 older persons. And South Africa, and this is important to note, has no dedicated community-based geriatric care workforce. This means that although policy speaks of dignity, aging in place, and inclusion, the actual system relies heavily on families, especially women, to fill the gaps. Because services are so limited, the older person grant, or the pension grant as we know it, becomes the main form of support. In fact, almost 98% of state expenditure is spent on the grant. Then this is marked at 2,800 Rand per month. It is one of the most substantial grants in the social protection system. But it's important to recognize that the grant does not only support one individual or the older person themselves. Research shows that almost 2/3 of older person grant beneficiaries live in households of 5 or more people. In many households, this grant is stretched across multiple generations and multiple needs. Why does this matter? This matters because older persons are not only recipients of care, they are often also providers of it. Many older people, especially older women, are supporting children and other dependents, both financially and physically. Grandmothers, in particular, play a central role in sustaining households, providing food, supervision, and daily care, as well as providing the intergenerational transfer of knowledge and culture. So when we talk about older persons, we are also talking about people who are holding families and communities together. I just want to briefly note that many older persons, as I've said, themselves have significant needs. But what is the extent of these needs? Many older adults 23% of older adults live with diabetes and 68% with hypertension. These conditions require regular treatment, monitoring, and support. Yet this need for care exists in a context where public services are weak and infrastructure is often poor. Research shows that over 28% of older person grant beneficiaries do not have access to water in their own dwelling or yard, and only 26% have access to a flush toilet with on-site disposal. So there are a number of interventions that are needed. For example, we need a more integrated national care strategy that looks at how does one policy, for example, the policy of aging in place, speak to policies, for example, on ECD services. When ECD services are not provided and ECDs are not registered, this means children become the responsibility of older persons, particularly older women. This means that the old age pension grant is stretched, not to protect the needs of older persons themselves, but to provide within entire households. So this means there is a trade-off between the needs of older persons and of those dwelling in an entire household.
Thank you so much, Julie. And the question to be asked is that social grant even enough for the older person? Even worse if it has to be shared with the rest of the family. And I want you to also, as you're going to come back at a later stage, to also remember that 60 years in South Africa is a pensionable age. And older persons are saying that's ageism, because now they are being denied an opportunity to still participate in order for them to be able to fend for themselves. Whilst we've got other careers where people are still allowed to work, politicians are able to work, commissioners can still work, lawyers can still work, doctors can still work. Yes. Mm-hmm. Teachers, I think not teachers so much, maybe lecturers? Yeah. All right. Yes, Prof. Yes, let me come to you, Jimmy. You've now also had, Julie was dealing with the older persons, and even, to a certain extent, went to the family life. What are you bringing to the table?
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Without any shadow of doubt, equitable share is meant for the poor. But we see the converse of that within the municipalities. I'll talk about person with disability, because it's an area where we normally work very closely with that sector. We're part of the NEDLEC community constituents. wherein we table some of the realities that are confronting each and every sector, especially those sectors which are vulnerable, through the pre-budget process. But I must say that nothing has been done to the effect up to this date to ensure that the matter of person with disability is looked at. For example, look at the issue of employment target within the community-based public works program. I think Department of Public Works states quite categorically that 30% of the intake should be considered for, let's say, person with disability. But up until today, you'll find that all the projects, there'll be, something written that we've employed X number of people. But when you go physically and audit, you'll find that has never materialized up to this day. So we've been advocating for a pro-poor and a people-centered approach. But I think we must say that there's been a trend that we have noticed in government, especially the National Treasury. All these budgets since 2020 up until now, as my comrade next to me, we were arguing very strongly in those days for a pro-poor people's budget, campaign or a process. And government has been very, very much instrumental, the way they will call in all other critical stakeholders, government, civil society, churches, faith-based, as well as the labor. But that approach has been, neglected. That is why there's no monitoring, mechanism in place to ensure that we look at this matter. Even at NETLEC, the minister only comes after the presentation of the budget speech. And at that time, you won't be able to interrogate or put some strong proposal of how things should be done, And I think it's something that we need to look at it. And I'm very glad that the colleagues that are here from the society, I think in close collaboration with South African Human Rights Commission, we need to look at this matter. I think it should be a standard practice that the Minister of Finance cannot present, budget speech without first, creating that enabling pre-budget planning phase, where you engage the civil society, Section 27, and various other organizations. In the past we were with Sangoko, we advocate very strongly, and you'll see that whenever the minister, Trevor Manuel was the minister at the time, or Mboweni, so when they present all these issues, the targets, how to make sure that the municipality as a coalface, works very closely with those sectors, were looked at. But those things are no longer happening. So that is why we are proposing for a strong call for South African Human Rights Commission to work with these organs of people's power so that we could reclaim the space on the issue of the budgeting. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. I think Commissioner Makwasha is definitely listening through you, Kenneth. But this is something that she has already started. Because in Human Rights Commission, we are expected to have Section 11 committees. And this is where we ensure that civil society, the experts, and so forth are represented so that they can amplify those voices. But you're saying something so profound that even the data is not really accurate. And just the other day, in fact, I attended the national conference organized by DSD on persons with disabilities. And they are saying that for 2026, 2027, they're looking at 5% for employment. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, we just never going to get there. But those are some of the things that you can talk to. Consultation is definitely key. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Public participation, very, very important. But it does not look like we are there yet. But those are some of the things that we can definitely, as we look towards recommendations, those are things we can put forward. Shekina, I come to you, my sister. I love what you said to me earlier on, that you are actually looking at everyone. And I was saying to you, in fact, at the food inquiry, I was chastised. Because half the time I would say to them, what about older persons? What about persons with disabilities? But you are saying once you could be possibly an older person, you still look at everyone. You are inclusive. You are accommodative. That's the beauty of it. Over to you, my sister.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to take us, and a lot of you sitting here, I'm hearing my own voice. Is that correct? Okay. So a lot of you sitting here are extremely young. So I want to take us actually 30 years back. When we attained our democracy, we were vibrant, we were looking at everything we looked at, and I know Professor would also, we looked at white papers, at green papers, and developed a lot of policies. We worked, and everybody worked very hard. For the first 10 years, everybody had fire. The government worked. People at every level, at national, at provincial, at local level. We wrote policies on disability, we wrote policies on women, we wrote policies on a range of issues. Those policies are now sitting somewhere and need to actually be revamped and re-looked at. We're at a point, and I think the Human Rights Commission had foresight. We're at a point now where we need to relook everything, including how we provide services to everybody, but more importantly, to services of people that we say are indigent. You know, somebody said, do not call us poor people. Do not call us this, do not call us that. But also at the same time, we all belong to those communities. What are we doing individually, but also collectively? Because government cannot do everything. Unfortunately, they cannot. They can provide a space for us, and they can provide for us to be able to do the work that needs to be done. But how do we engage with them? When do we begin to engage with them? And I think this is a reset button to begin to say, okay, this is where we are, this is what needs to happen, and this is how we're going to go forward. We've had the first 30 years. We've made the mistakes. We've developed this. We as South Africans write beautiful papers, but our shortcoming is how we actually action those policies. So we're at a point now that we need to begin to say it is not only about indigent policies, but how do we make sure that the child goes to school and finishes school, that a child goes to university and finishes university, that we do not have people that get lagged behind. And how do we do that? That we all begin to work together. So the organization that has resurfaced again, we used to have Sengoko, which used to have all of the NGOs together. So now we have something called Civil Society Unmute, because we muted. So we want to be unmuted, and this is where we begin to look at how can we actually hold government responsible, but also how do we hold each other responsible, and how do we make sure that our children are actually at the space where they need to be. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Sakina. Thank you so much. And this has been said a lot, that you know we are a country which has got a very beautiful constitution, policies, laws, and so forth. But when it comes to implementation, we have serious, serious challenges. Nicholas, let me come to you. You know, from the accountancy side, are we bringing everybody on board? Are we leaving people behind? And if so, who are we leaving behind?
So unequivocally, the accounting system leaves most people behind. And that's why it's a privilege for us to be with the human rights community. And I must acknowledge I'm sitting with an honored guest. I was just shared the story about what happened to you in the old apartheid days. So thank you for sharing that story with me. So, yeah, so from an accounting perspective, how do we, and I suppose we work with accountants. Accountants exist because there are businesses, large, medium, and small. And those businesses have compliance obligations. So the whole existence of an accountant at the current moment is to report on compliance. And the main act, therefore, in my reference, is then the Income Tax Act. So there's two things that we can address. We could say that, and it was actually Milton Friedman, one of the champions of the free market system, that came up with the idea of a negative income tax. So he opposed a welfare system that we currently have and said, no, if you are earning zero income, then the tax system should pay you. So he would say there's a threshold of 5,000 Rand a month. If you earn zero income, then you get a negative income tax. In other words, the state then, through SARS, pays you 2,500 a month, or whatever that threshold is. And as you then start earning an income, so the benefit accruing to you decreases. So he would then link, he called it a negative income tax, so that the effect is the same as a welfare system, but because it's in the tax system, it's coupled to becoming a more productive citizen, which we would then propose to National Treasury, a negative income tax. The other benefits that you could do in an income tax is to allow more deductions for businesses when it comes to employing women or disabled or elderly people. So, and remember, I'm not talking from a social perspective, I'm totally just talking from an economic perspective, and it might sound bizarre, but I have to limit myself to the income tax. So, to get businesses to employ more of the people that we want, you give them incentives to do so. And that might make a real difference. Yeah, I think that is, in summary, what I would like to say. The additional things that you could do, we're all familiar, I suppose, with the United Nations SDGs, no, the disclosures that's necessary. And we could change the Companies Act to add not only the people that you employ, but the ones that you're not employing. So not only requiring companies to report on performance, but maybe also on the potential performance that they are not achieving by not engaging with the vulnerable communities. So those would be two practical ways in which you could get through legislation a change in behavior.
Wow, thank you so much for that. In fact, you remind me of what the legal practitioners have come up with in order to really incentivize big firms, to employ young legal practitioners, by giving them, those points, so in terms of the scorecards. So at least we are hoping that it will find, it will find its translation at some point, because at the moment there is a backlash against it, of course, because people are feeling that it's not the best thing to happen. But you've sort of given your indicators, but if you were to say this is that one, that I would say definitely let's go with it, which one would that be? Before we then hand over to the crowd to engage you. I'm going to start with you, Nicholas, and move that way down.
Yeah, thank you. The businesses already, most big businesses already have CSI projects, so we must acknowledge the contribution they're making, and some of them are, I suppose, in total would be billions every year paid by big business into civil society in some form or another. Whether the vulnerable communities are receiving enough recognition, that is true. The accounting standards and everything we do isn't allowing us to see the vulnerable communities. So maybe we can address the reporting side. And then lastly, I think the thing that I favor most is the negative income tax. So instead of asking DSD or the other government entities to issue grants and social support, maybe make it part of the tax system, where SARS collects taxes but also distributes it. The effect will be the same. I suppose you could increase it, the amount that's being received, but then there would be an incentive to say that I want to become a productive citizen, and then as you become more productive, so the support reduces.
I just want to say something, that I think that one of the biggest things that is critical, sorry, getting excited about it. One of the things that I think that we did not do as South Africans is that we didn't throw the apartheid system out. We worked with the apartheid system, within the apartheid system. So we don't have our own systems. And that in itself, for me personally, I think is critical, because we don't have a process that says we're starting on a null basis, where, and it comes from what Mikkel is saying. We don't have a null base where we're saying, as a community, as a people, as South Africans, this is what we want, this is how we want it, and this is where we need to get to. All of us are responsible for that. It is not only government. So we've got all of these policies. Human rights is important. We've come from a process where it was really, really difficult, and it was horrible. So, and now we're at a point where we're doing the extreme. So even our children don't even, I mean, when we were at school, we knew exactly what we were going to do. You ask our children now, what is it that you want to become? Say, I don't know. I'm going to take a gap year. What the hell, man? Sorry.
If I just recall two things I wanted to add, and that is the unseen. And that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
There's vulnerable people that's not seen. So we need to elevate that. Now, two areas. One, you mentioned a woman being involved with upliftment work and taking care of the family and taking care of communities. And there's no remuneration or payment for them. So that is a big gap. The second one, and which SIBA is closely involved with traditional leaders, we signed an MOU with RULESA, the Royal Leaders of South Africa, starting off with assisting them with financial management within the areas. But that soon developed much bigger, so that as we started to engage, we realized that there are about, let's say, 13 officially recognized kings. I think there are more, but officially recognized. And then there's about, and my numbers are wrong, but let's say about 300 or 400 chiefs, and then there's about 3,800 headmen. And as you asked the communities, what are these headmen doing? They are social workers, in effect. They maintaining the rural area, where they, with little disputes, many magistrates pass on some of the cases to the headman. And then they take the case file, and then they go and administer law. And they resolve disputes amongst people within the area. And then there's obviously other things, conflicts, or maybe there's fences that's broken. So they maintain this community. And then if you calculate the number of people that headmen take care of, there's 18 million people living in the rural areas in South Africa, all falling under the kings and the chiefs and the headmen. But none of them are receiving any recognition or any payment for the work that they do. And if you calculate the value of the work, let's say 50,000 a month, and you add it with all the headmen, you get to about 2 billion rand a year that these people are giving freely to society. But because society doesn't recognize them, they can't benefit. So we developed a platform called the Royal Authority for Commerce and Charters to start storytelling and to start the process of collecting donations and so forth. and then added something which I wanted to share. It's called the Royal Charter. So we call it, in a very simple terms, it's like a halal sign, but for cultural rights. And we're rolling it out with the kings and the queens, but that's a voluntary way that you could give recognition to communities.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for that. I wanted to say to you, Nicholas, Accra says a lot of money in South Africa is really not accounted for. It is in the hands of people. People do not bank it. And so if you wanted to do a proper valuation of whether we have money in our country, you've got a challenge. Okay, Jimmy, what is that one indicator?
Yeah, look, Madam Chair, in our discussion at NEDLEC, I think it's a conducive social dialogue platform. We came up into two issues that we think are very important. The first one relates to, is there a need for Department of Women, Youth and Disability in the country? And I think we need to be vocal on this matter, colleagues, because I think there's no impact by that particular department. All these issues that we're talking about, I think at the end of the day, they need to be resolved. Somebody must take a lead in that process. And that particular department is not fulfilling its obligation. So one of the issues that we are pushing is that government should ensure that they reduce some of the ministries. And I think this particular one is something that will assist. Social development, to some extent, I think during the time when women and youth were falling under, at least you could see some direction. There's a direction that will lead into something. But with this department, it leaves much to be desired. On the last issue, we need to promote a civil society for an inclusion, not an exclusion process. We should ensure that we bring everybody, on board. Let's not leave anyone behind. During the days of, or the time of the G20, I mean, it was very beautiful and magnificent to see the role played by all those sectors. To the extent that government has learned a lesson into that, to the extent that now, through this national dialogue process, I think there are about 40 sectors. Yes. 40 sectors that are there. And it includes some of those that we don't know about. The Khoisan, Rastafarian, and various other sectors. Because I think they want to create their own homogenic environment there so that they could take the process forward here.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for that. You and Sukina are really saying the same thing, even with Nicholas here. We need to bring everybody on board. Julie?
Thank you so much, Chair. I think I want to reiterate Jimmy's point, I suppose just to put it differently, so as to not necessarily need to dissolve the Department of Women without further qualifying what that would mean. I think in many ways we've sidelined the issues of youth, persons with disabilities, and women by having a dedicated department. There is a lack of mainstreaming the issues of these persons across departments. So potentially what is a better system to have is to have gender focal points, which allegedly exist in each department, but they are not emboldened or sufficiently resourced to do this work. Because the issue is intersectional, right? It runs across departments, from Department of Transport, Department of Water and Sanitation. We need to have better interconnectedness between departments and some kind of strategy that speaks to how we live our lives, which is within families, within communities, within societies, and within a nation. And what does that mean?
Thank you so much. In fact, each time we chastise the departments, that is what we keep asking them. Why are you not collaborating? Why are you not talking to each other? They are really working in silos. Chair, I know that it's probably almost time for you to leave. But that indicator, Chair, that you think we should definitely consider as we look towards, rectifying the situation as it is.
Thank you, Chairperson. Indigenous communities are very vulnerable, and open to abuse, both internally and externally. Indigenous communities are also influenced, and as such, they get divided. And the division in the indigenous communities lead to a position where they're not listened to. They're not listened to because if you have 20, 30 groups coming to talk and say, I represent the Khoisan grouping, who are we talking to? You see, and so the most important thing is to say that the collective must hold, and they must speak at least from a collective basis in order to be heard. Because if you have different voices, then your message gets lost, and you then get exploited by those who who needs to address your issues, but you cannot address because the excuse is, who do I talk to? How many leaders are there? What are they? But in the meantime, the communities suffer. And therefore, I think important is for the collective to hold and for people to be more united within the indigenous communities. And also, the second part to that is that not to see them as different from being South African. You see, yes, you can claim that you're the First Nation, Aboriginal people, etc., but you have to be part of that South Africanness and claim your South Africanness in its full sense of the word. But then government must come to the party and see and make good to them what was promised. And indigenous people in the southern Africa, if I can also talk about that. I mean, if you look at the Basarwa in Botswana, how they have been removed from the areas of where the diamond mining took place and so on. So they could have been very rich today, but they were removed from there. People in the Kalahari or in the Northern Cape, they still want to hunt, but they cannot get that opportunity because they have to go through a process of having to apply for a license and then come to a farm and pay the farmer. And all the time they are being denied that hunting opportunity.
Thank you so much, Chair. And those were some of the things that they've raised even at the food systems inquiry, to say the laws are not inclusive. They do not take into account their lifestyle, as they no longer want to be called indigenous people. They want to be called aboriginal, and there's also another term. Anyway. It is your time to then engage my panelists. Thank you for coming back, even though it looks like some are sleeping. Are you awake? Are you awake? Thank you, thank you, thank you. So let me see the hands. Kenneth, you want to take the mic? I've seen my lady there. 1. Anyone else? 2? Yes. 3? Another one? At least let's have 4 as a start. Come on now. Is this, you are actually showing us that indeed there are people that are left behind by not wanting to engage their issues. Because even this room is not accommodative. Even this room is not accessible to persons with disabilities. And even in this room, they are not represented. So if you don't ask questions, what you're saying is they should deal with their issues. And they are saying nothing about us without us. And yes, they are not here. But I am here. I will continue to do my work. Kenneth, please give the first person the mic. Over to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adele again. I just wanted to ask Chris, what specifically becomes a problem when we have to change the way we address now Aboriginal people instead of indigenous people? So what is it about the definition that makes it important when addressing those identity politics? And what is the difference between the two, like the important difference between indigenous and Aboriginal?
Thank you. The next person.
It's wonderful to see some of my colleagues. What about education? I think I'm asking all of you there to talk about the education, because we're in an education space. I think it's also important.
Thank you.
This is directed to Sakina. She mentioned that we are still living with the apartheid system. So to break it down, where do we start?
Thank you so much.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Kamkhelo Modise. I'm an occupational therapist by profession. So this topic is actually something that is within interest. With what my colleague was talking about, especially now with the intellectual capacity within the learners, and looking into the system that accommodates those with intellectual capacity problems. Within the schooling sector, there's now an increase instead of learners now getting expelled or suspended because of age. So now, what is the way forward that we can, navigate and see? Because back then, as you guys were saying, during the apartheid, or let me say the first 15 years, post-democracy, they had systems in place that looked into intellectual capacity from the beginning of grade R. And now, with all the problems with the grade R's not getting early ECD, and now the ECD program is now being instilled, how then can we assist our intellectual capacity of our country?
Thank you so much. Let's just end with the lady there. Yes.
Thanks. Wasn't sure if I should ask a question, but because it's something we always struggle with in government, is accounting for, in our reporting, for all the various vulnerable groups. And it's a challenge because there isn't a clear source of data for a baseline and a clear system for each of the groups being monitored. So the tendency is for vulnerable groups to just be this lump, undifferentiated, which is very unfair, and then people get lost in that. So there are some tools that we've spoken about over the last 2 days that are being poorly implemented. One of them is the Indigent Register, and who is tracking how that is being compiled by municipalities, and how well or how poorly, and what guidelines they're following. My reading of it is that although National Treasury gives a guide, I'm not sure municipalities in their own annual review of how they're going to compile it are looking at that, and then they recompile it every year. So, and a good example, for example, is farm dwellers. I mean, they're just lost on our system. There's no database in the country for how many there are, how many have been moved off farms, how many are still there, and they don't get planned for, they disappear. And there have been court cases recently that have insisted that government, whoever we are in all three spheres, must provide them with basic services. But the starting point is, how do you plan if you don't know who's on which farm and how many people and etc. So I'm just wondering if the presenters have some thoughts. One on the continued lumping together of vulnerable groups and not differentiating them and having clear strategies for each of them. And even lumping them in the sense that one person gets assigned in government and they must look at all of those things, And then a report comes at the end of the quarter and suddenly I must find a way to say how many women, how many this, how many. I mean, where do I draw that information from? Because I haven't been tracking it and it didn't have a baseline in the first place. So, yeah, it's just a comment. Maybe if the panelists want to comment on that too, thanks. Sorry, last one, and then biggest is in the under traditional authority areas. I mean, how do you even begin to unpack that? Because our planning systems tend to work on properties and property registers and owners, etc. But once we start trying to dig below that, it's extremely difficult. So where does that information get tracked and come from? If we don't create a system that allows us to understand who's on the land, where are they, who are the users, and then start breaking the groups. Stats SA may help us a bit, but I'm not sure. Thanks.
And they are saying they do have the stats, but sometimes definitely not accurate. The last question from Commissioner Magwash.
Thank you. I'm the host with the most. So I think one, I'll perhaps respond and then ask a question. When we're talking about the unseen, these are the farm workers, dwellers, as well as those in rural communities. I think what we quite established quite clearly, the conversation we had last week at the National Food System Inquiry, was the role that the Department of Agriculture will play in opening up these spaces. Because it's very difficult for government, especially the Department of Labor, to actually have access to farms. But I think given conversations that the minister has undertaken, that he, through his department, has access to that area, perhaps we could do that, and perhaps with COCTA there is a possibility of having that conversation, because I think the Commission is always worried about the use of data and how government needs to use data the use of data for government to make informed decisions. And that does not happen sometimes because there is data that's missing, and the conversation then means instead of catering for 10 people, government is catering for 3 people. So I think everyone has a role to play in providing government with the necessary data. Commissioner Kunene, we always have this debate when we say leave no one behind, and how we always have this conversation. We've spoken about children, we've spoken about the elderly, and people who want to be identified either as Aboriginal, and there was that debate, Chair, at the inquiry. Others want to be called Indigenous people, others want to be called Aboriginal. Now, when your panel spoke, I wanted to have clear indicators, so that when my office is going and we're creating that monitoring tool, we have indicators to ensure that we've not left anyone behind, and then this meets the definition of what we would be calling the pro-human rights budget.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Chair, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, Chair of this session. The contestation for recognition and wanting to be there has created that people now starting grouping themselves. So you've got so many groupings in the indigenous community. Look, we're all indigenous. We're all indigenous, but this is a group that has been left behind and needs to get full recognition coming into. So some people have taken the view that what's happening in New Zealand and Australia, where people call themselves Aboriginal, which means they are the original people here. But even that is a problem, because it says, and then out of it comes like, because we were here first, you came second, we are treated worse than those who came after us. So indigenous is a word, recognizing that, there were different groupings in this country. And during colonization, of course, many of them were massacred and put out and so on. So there's no difference, really. It is just a contestation for leadership, that they're using the word so that they make themselves different from the other one and so on. So that's where we are. With regard to the farming, if I can just go to that one, Mr. Chair, farm workers will tell us, when political parties come around and want our votes, and they say, vote for us because we're going to do A, B, C, D. But when there's no water and electricity, the municipality says we can't provide on private land. And so, left behind again. Come with this, and then be left behind. Second thing is that, and I can maybe speak for a few provinces, but particularly in the Western Cape, many provinces, many people, farmers, are now working through labor brokers that bring workers from outside the farm and turn their farms into lifestyle estates. And so it's very difficult then also that, you know, whereas maybe, give an example, maybe in the Western Cape where you may be at about 200,000 farm workers, you have less than 20,000, 30,000 today because you are using, you know, through labor brokers, they bring in the farm workers per day. On the indigent policy, government budget for it, local government budget for it. But if there's unemployed people and you're a pensioner, then you can qualify for it. But the moment your son or daughter works, you loses that indigent fund. And so you need to explain, to ask from the municipality, how does this work? Because you could be a seasonal worker working for 3 months, and then you have to go through a whole process to apply for it again. So on those two issues, I thought, let me just comment it on well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you
May I
so
go?
much. In fact, the farm dwellers were saying then they will be eligible for UIF, and that also is cumbersome to obtain. And yes, they really go hungry as a result. Let me come to you, Julie. Any question that you'd like to weigh on? Maybe the education part? Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Chair. We thank you so much. Go well. I know that Sakina did speak to it a little bit, but maybe you can also touch on it.
I'll keep it short, I suppose. I mean, it's quite a broad question around education, and I'm not sure exactly which facet of education, but suppose what I will say is that, you know, there is a need to have education around the differing needs of groups, and I spoke specifically around older persons. I think that we need to be educated on the fact that South Africa, you know, is and will become an aging population. I believe by 2050, those aged 60 will outnumber those aged 5. So this is the kind of education we need, because we need to start now with the preparations. As I said, we have a already overwhelmed healthcare system. So I think, yeah, it is about understanding need, that we need education around.
Yeah, so if we have got a lot of older people, our healthcare systems are definitely going to suffer because they won't qualify to go to private hospitals.
Exactly.
So we really need to prepare, Commissioner Makwasha. We need to prepare. We need to be able to work. Those of us who are still able to work must be allowed to work.
Yeah.
Prof must be allowed to work.
We have NHI.
And hopefully the NHI will be working properly. Jimmy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to speak on the issue of education. I think one aspect that we're forgetting to tap into the issue of skills development in the country, especially for programs that ensure that they enhance recognition of prior learning within our communities. Each and every year, you'll find that schools development fund gets returned back to the treasury because it is not utilized. So our strong appeal is that let us make sure that we make use of the skills development fund. On the issue of ECD, early childhood development, this is also an area that we need to look at it. I think it's important that we should promote foundational education within our communities. If you go around in most of the township, you'll find out children to the age of 5 or even less than that roaming the street, you know. It's sad. I think it's something that we need to look at it very seriously. On the issue of the indigent register, efforts are being employed as we speak to ensure that, you know, integrated information management system is devised so that all register that is compiled by municipalities, they gets checked against other departments. The Department of Labor is involved in that process. Social development is involved as well, so that they check whether organizations have fully complied. I think it was one of the areas which helped in ensuring that we curb the money laundering as well as combating of terrorist finance. That has been one of the variables that has helped the country going forward. The other issue, the last issue, the ICT, Information, Communication and Technology. We need to promote science and maths in all our schools so that our children can learn that we need scientists, we need future mathematicians, as well as other fields that are important within education. But all these, they need civil society to be at the forefront in driving this and ensuring that we work very closely with those grassroots organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. Let's come to you then, Sakina.
Thank you. I just need to start off by saying that in terms of when I talked about the apartheid system, I'm talking about the accounting systems, right? We didn't come up with our own accounting systems. We used that was there already, right? There are areas that we've done very well in terms of education and educating our people, but then also at the same time is that we became lazy and we just picked up where things were easy to go and do, So we also need to reset and really look at, has this worked for us? If it hasn't worked for us, what is it that we need to do? Like we're doing right now. A lot of things haven't worked. How do we then reset? Let's just talk about, and I'm going to talk to Lisa. You asked about how do we get data, right? So I am also part of the South African Women in Dialogue, which is called SAWID. SAWID has a lot of social workers. They partnered with UNISA, and what they did is they did something called, and if you go to their website, you will find that research there. They did something called the caravan. So what they did is they went into a community, and they actually then went house to house. So you had 3 people working in a street. So they would actually go, and this was for the indigent program. Now, I'm not sure whether it was done in Ekurhuleni. Yes, it was done in Ekurhuleni. So they went door to door to find out who's working, how many grandchildren are there, how many grandparents are there, who is there, and they actually did a very good job on that. I think it was UN Women that also gave them a stipend to give the people that were going to do this research. So they did a door-to-door research. And it's a very good research. Unfortunately, it could not be, because of funding again, it could not be, rolled out to other provinces. So when we're talking about, these things can be done. Because also we have a whole lot of young people who are graduates, who have not worked, and we can actually utilize them. And there's the tax money that we can then use, or we can use the monies that goes back into government. We're wanting to create jobs. Those kind of things can. I mean, Adele sitting here, she says she came back to the school because she had graduated. She didn't have a job for 2 years. So she's lucky that she can come back and come and do a postgrad. But there's a lot of people that can't do that. So how do we utilize those skills? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'll focus on the education and innovation. So there is a movement. I've attended some conferences where people are start talking about mother tongue education. where people get educated in the language that they speak at home. There's many schools where the child and the teacher and the community all speak different languages, which is problematic. No? So then, secondly, there's an obvious need to innovate in our education system. So I think as the Human Rights Commission considers all these aspects, what we do is we take a picture of reality as it is now, and then adjust policies or interventions according to the image that we've created. But basically it's just a photo of it's a still of the existing condition. But it doesn't mean that the system has to work that way. So education could be much cheaper and much better simultaneously if you change certain underlying conditions. And I was thinking the same with, somebody mentioned the national health insurance, that you could have a private run system that's affordable and available for everyone if you think creatively and innovatively. And with the new technologies and things available, it's possible. But as the underlying policies and assumptions, it drives certain costs. It causes the thing to be unreachable or unattainable. So I suppose as a society, we need to refocus our attention. I don't want to use the word nationalistic, but we have to have a South Africa first approach. Then as a community living within its borders, come to some kind of an agreement to say we want to be a winning nation, define what it means, and then redefine our current systems and what we offer, and then at scale deliver massive support to everyone. And again, I want to use that example of China, because 800 million people out of poverty in less than 30 years is 800 million. And if I think about we only 60 million, then you could argue that we don't really have a problem, because our unemployment is only 40 million. And I say it now with much respect, obviously. But so we kind of make the problem bigger than it is, because the people that had a big problem was China. And they got 800 million out of poverty. And they built, if the stats are true, they built cities within a month. And they built bridges like you won't believe. So maybe we're comparing ourselves with, we're making the wrong comparison. We're thinking it's impossible when in fact there's many nations that it's not impossible, they're even doing it as we said here. So what China did in 1979 was starting to send their graduates overseas. They realized at the moment in 1979, we're not the smartest and we don't know anything. So they sent, humbly enough, they sent everybody over to study in Britain and the US on the condition that they would come back, and which they now did, and then recreated a new China. So much so that people want to now study with them. And now their services and everything is just better than anything you can find anywhere. So it's possible, but then you have to make it possible for yourself. And saying the system we have now, we can't make it better or improve it. We must learn from the Chinese. Even if we have to bring them this side, have them train us. Yeah, so that is the two things I wanted to say. One, it's education, mother tongue. And secondly, we have to be innovative and creative and think afresh to what's really possible. Because if we say now we want to uplift 20% a year, why not 80%? And then once you set that high benchmark, then for some reason your own systems and structures fall in place and you get it. So maybe our target is too low, or what we think is possible.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I don't think there's anyone else in any event. I think time is against us, is it not? We still have time? Okay. I thought I'm seeing one more hand up there. Oh, one more. Please, just one, that one lady, please come down so that you can speak from here. Otherwise, they're going to close you out.
Maybe I just wanted to make a comment around the China example, because I think it was made yesterday and today. And while it's a positive example in terms of what's doable, and what's possible is ultimately it's the enforcement. China has a very strong enforcement in terms of if you work for government, you are a public servant. You know you're a public servant. If you do not deliver, it's literally your life. So you're not going to steal. You're not going to be corruptible because you're going to lose your life. So it's in the sense of, I guess, we don't want to go to the extreme of China in terms of you lose your life, but in terms of reinforcement. How do we ensure reinforcement? How do we ensure that people actually do what they're supposed to do? Because I think the conversations we've been having in the last 2 days is that there's money, it's implementation. People don't implement, nothing happens. Money goes back. But when money goes back and you redirect it, ultimately it means people aren't getting services as well. So we're not doing anything. We're just running in circles. And I think the big thing in terms of the China example, excellent, but it's in the sense of how do we get that model similar from a rights-based aspect and ensure enforceability? Thanks.
Thank you so much. And let me appreciate the panel for really being part of this discussion. And thank you so much for those indicators that you have shared. And Commissioner, I'm sure there's something that you can work with. And I also forgot that, by the way, there's also invisible disability, and maybe it is accommodated, you know, whilst I wanted to see the visible one. And also, Section 9 of the Constitution is very clear. It talks about equality, and therefore, no one should be left behind when one has regard to the fact that we are all equal before the law, and we shouldn't be discriminated against. But again, we must be treated with dignity. So whilst we remember that there's no legal framework for persons with disabilities, but at least something is being done currently in the country, which is a good thing for us. And we need to definitely broaden the horizon. The LGBTQI community was not mentioned, except by the MEC in the morning, which was a good thing. But we've got many others that have still not been mentioned, Commissioner, and I'm sure you'll be able to ultimately get all the members of the most vulnerable groups. And of course, my lady there, I think what you're lacking in the departments is just capacity. And if they could employ more people, and they would solve a lot of problems in the country. Thank you so much. We don't have the act that calls persons with disabilities.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I stand in the way of your cocktail. If we can just listen and we quickly close it, we will go to our last session of the day. And that is a cocktail, and I'm told that the sponsors of the cocktail are saying there are no price limits. So do what you may with that. So firstly, let me extend my gratitude to our partners, the Wits School of Governance and SIBA. This partnership was not haphazard, not futureless. As you see, we have banners, and these banners must work until my term comes to an end and until the next commissioner comes in and takes over this focal area. This partnership is rooted in both the practical and the theoretical framework of governance and budgets. Secondly, I'd like to thank all the panelists and the experts that brought new perspectives and insights into pro-human rights budgeting. To the Commission consider your inputs in high regard and aims to capture them in their totality to have an informed outcome of the Indaba. To my fellow commissioners who are here, Commissioner Kwinana, as well as those who had to leave due to other commitments, thank you so much. I would like to just also thank the staff members at the Human Rights Commission, especially my team. They have worked tirelessly this whole entire month. In terms of last week, we were at the inquiry. This week, we are here at the Indaba. So a very special thank you to Tammy, right at the back. Thank you so much. To Kenneth, who had to do cardio exercises in this process. Thank you so much. Your inputs, your sleepless nights are highly appreciated. But I'd also like to thank the most important stakeholders, the members of our audience for their support, as well as their thoughts, their questions, which shifted perspectives and informed new perspectives. Your questions and engagements in and outside the venue cover some of the blind spots that we have had in coming to the Indaba. The purpose of this Indaba was to, in a piecemeal fashion, inject into the minds of government, civil society, the notion that budgets must cater for the most vulnerable and marginalized members of our society. Although significant work has been done in this area, the Commission wishes to heighten the discourse and challenge the national narrative on pro-human rights budgeting. In short, pro-human rights budgeting. In part, the outcomes of this Indaba will be fashioned as follows. The commitments that were made by COCTA and the MECs of Finance will be immediately followed up. In part, COCTA committed to reforms through the draft 2026 white paper on local government, particularly on enhancing service delivery and poor financial management. The MECs of Finance spoke about increased grants and earmarks for health and education. The Commission will also follow up on each of these commitments and publicize our findings. The panel on equitable share yesterday made much of whether equitable share is enough and whether it is targeted at the marginalized. In part, the Indaba aimed to interrogate this very issue, and we're glad that there is some indication that we agree that the equitable share is aimed at quality service delivery and ought to be targeted at the indigenous. In part, the Commission will improve on its submission to the Standing Committee on Appropriations. The panel on defining pro-human rights budgeting provided a framework for defining an inclusive budget. We were presented with a study that said budgets must be gender-centered. That is a start. We then heard that budgets as early as in the early 2000s were social security orientated, and part of that undergrinding has been lost. All these are indicators of the direction we ought to weigh in creating a monitoring tool for municipal, provincial, and national budgets. Lastly, the panel, led by Commissioner Kwinana on Leave No One Behind, added to the indicators from the earlier session on defining a pro-human rights budget. In totality, the session cautioned that all the persons are entities, and Commissioner Kwinana always reminds me that I will become old. She always emphasizes you're young, but you need to plan for your future. And I think that is that is a reminder. Regarding the partnership, we're particularly with the University of the Wits School of Governance, particularly because there is a pipeline conversation about introducing pro-human rights to MECs, DGDs, as well as CFOs, municipal managers, so that they understand that budget is not about figures at the end of the day. It's about ensuring that the outcomes are centered in terms of a human rights approach. Therefore, Prof, perhaps we need to have a conversation on how the curriculum needs to look into pro-human rights budgeting. I think we need a school, and you said this quite eloquently in the beginning, you are the leaders of governance in terms of Africa, and perhaps you also need to lead this conversation with those that come to your school for further education. This way, the policymakers will not only be interacting with children, older persons, and persons with disabilities at an implementation stage, but they will be able to then define what pro-human rights budgeting is prior to joining the private and public sector. Therefore, we are going to be together for the long haul, Prof, for as long as possible. So this is a three-way marriage. So I'll call it a customary marriage, because then there'll be multiple partners. If I say it's a civil marriage, one of us must litigate. Siba, your expertise in guiding this process is much appreciated. The CFOs that we have interacted with and who you've brought on to assist us have balanced and had us understand what fiscal responsibility and constitutional obligations are. We trust that with our partnership, this can be achieved and we can continue having this conversation. And I remember, Nicholas, when you started and you were talking about trillions and you were saying 30 years and 30,000 years, you made it so easy for us to understand. Because I can tell you, all of us who are lawyers became lawyers simply because we are horrible at maths. So for the first time, we are bringing the accountants and the lawyers in the same room and having conversations about how we need to have a budget that speaks to human rights. So once again, to the people in the room, to those who are joining us virtually, please do watch this space, because there's a lot that this partnership will be achieving. There's a lot that the human rights will be doing under the theme of pro-human rights budgeting. Thank you so much. From next year, we will be calling it the People's Budget Indaba. Thank you. Prof, can I bring you forward to just make your closing remarks, or I'm going to bring the mic to you, or do you okay? 2 seconds.
There's one thing we forgot to tell you, that after such an intensive conversation over the past 2 days, we're going to be closing the doors. There's going to be a test now, so because I saw you took some good notes. But I just want to say thank you very much for visiting the school. I was so pleased to see my students asking very important questions coming here. And that's what we try to do in the school, to make sure that as teaching happens, people are able to have conversations in the school and go back to the classroom to say, this speaker said this person said this official said this, so that our teaching in the classroom has an element of practice in it. And that's what we're trying to do as a school. So thank you very much, especially those who've been here since yesterday morning at 8 o'clock. I can see you're very tired, but for staying on, thank you very much. There are snacks available. We hope to see you back in the school. We organize many, many events of this nature where you can come and learn. There won't be a test, I promise you, for most of them. But you can just listen to people who can come and share their experiences with you. So thank you very much. And to the commission and the commissioners as well, our speakers, wonderful speakers. I mean, the last session was, I'm sure, mind-blowing. It's things that most of us don't think about. The plight of indigenous people, old people, disabled, etc., etc. The fact that there's not even disabled entry for disabled people here, it's a sense that we have to consciously remind ourselves about the challenges facing our country, our society. So thank you very much. A very productive 2 days. Drive safely. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Oh, no. The cocktail is out there, so there's a lot of Coke and fruit juices outside. See you. Thank you.